All right. Hi, I'm Wendy Liu. I'm the author of this book, Abolish Silicon Valley, How to Liberate Technology from Capitalism. And I am here with Sasha Perigo, who quit her job as a software engineer to write about the Bay Area's affordable housing crisis. You can read her work at Curbed SF, the SF Examiner, and SF Weekly. And so first of all, thank you, Sasha, for doing this with me. I know this is like a weird way to do an event. We were originally scheduled to do this at City Lights itself. I think we organized this like a week before the shelter in place thing happened. And so obviously it was, yeah, the world we planned this for does not exist anymore. But luckily we do have the internet and we can do virtual meetings. So thank you so much for taking the time to do this.
Yeah, no, I'm like so excited to be talking to you. I'm Sasha. I am so grateful to have received an advanced copy of the book. I love the book, and I like really, I think if I was going to describe how the first word I would use is relatable. I feel like I wasn't in the tech industry quite as long as you, but I feel like in a lot of ways our stories are parallels. So to give a little bit about my background, I went to Stanford for undergrad, and coming into it, I like didn't really know what I wanted to do. I applied for econ because I knew I liked social science, and my parents had gone to college and studied like a quantitative major. They both did econ, and it seemed to work out for them. And so they like get you excited at Stanford about like computer science because they make the intro class really, really fun. And so they like kind of they have a lot more women graduate from the undergrad computer science program, and some more people of color, although they're definitely struggling more with underrepresented groups than women, at least when I was there. And they kind of tell you, like, you don't need to apply for engineering, you take this intro course, and they kind of tell you, like, no matter what you like to do, you can use computer science for that. So I was kind of like, oh, I know I like public policy and social good stuff, but I'm like kind of lost for direction. And I took this class and I'm like, wow, this is really cool and creative, and like, I like the problem solving. So I did that for 4 years at Stanford. In the meantime, like interned. I was really interested in like civic technology. So I worked at like a gov tech startup, building technology for government. It was kind of marketed as a social good thing. And then I worked at Google as an engineer twice as an intern. I was on their election civic tech team. And then I was full-time for a year in computer security. After that, I transitioned to work at Hoodline, which is I still write for Hoodline, actually. They still have like a traditional news outlet, but they're also a VC-backed tech company. They were now acquired by Nextdoor, but when I was there, they were a VC-backed tech company that was working on like automation in news. So I was actually a data scientist there, but I joined because I wanted to be closer to news. And that's when I started writing about affordable housing on the side. I was doing a lot of housing activism through the Democratic Socialists, which Wendy's a member of too, so that's how we know each other. And I decided that I wanted to like take the leap and try and see how long I could make money writing about that. So that's how I got to where I am today.
How would you describe your process of being, I guess, like politicized to the point where you even started to care about housing and wanted to write that? Because I feel like there are a lot of people in the tech industry for whom they maybe recognize that there are these problems going on in the city where they live, but that it's not their problem. That someone else will take care of it.
Yeah, so I would like describe myself as an activist since I was like 14, and I grew up in the Bay Area is another big component. So I was involved in like queer activism, but I don't think I understood until like my early 20s, like around the time I graduated college, how all of these things were interconnected. And I kind of used to be like, oh, I can be an activist on the side, and then I'm like working this high paid job. And honestly, where it kind of hit me was, so ironically, I joined DSA while I was at Google. Me and a couple of other DSA members, they were really like my only friends at Google at the time because I wasn't very close to my team. I just didn't really feel like I related to them. And we started like a Marx reading group for fun at lunch at Google, which is like the weirdest way to get into reading Marx. So like that is around the time where I really, before that I'd identified as a socialist, but I wouldn't say I really knew what that meant. And shortly after that, I actually had to take disability from Google because I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder the first time, and I was really, really sick. And I was just like so unhappy I was ill. And I think at that point, you know, I was starting to see the connections with like not feeling great about, I thought like working in security was like this awesome social good thing. And then I'm like, if Google does surveil their employees, my team would be the team building that, right? Like internal security. So suddenly it's like the social good prospect doesn't seem great. I'm learning more and more about all the contractors at Google and how they just like don't have the same experiences that I do. So many more of my friends from home didn't get as lucky as I did with having all these opportunities in front of them, and were really struggling to pay for their housing. And at that point I was like, look, if I'm so unhappy that I am ill, and I'd like told myself that this was the form of success I needed to pursue in life, like what is the point, you know, if I'm so unhappy? So I'm like, why don't we try and do something else? And that something else that I was like kind of compelled to was like looking at these problems like holistically. And housing, I would say, is a symptom of the broader like problems with our economic system, but it felt like a symptom that I felt personally impacted by, and that I saw so many of my friends struggling with.
I remember when I did my internship at Google in 2013, and back then, I feel like the discourse around housing, I mean, at least the part of it that reached me, it wasn't as nuanced, it wasn't as I don't know, rigorous as like kind of what I'm hearing now. And I remember back then, you know, looking at housing prices and thinking, okay, if I want to move here after I graduate, I'd have to, you know, rent. And I was looking into it. It's like, okay, I get a 1-bedroom apartment for like 3,500, 4,000. And I thought that feels like a lot. So I started looking into like the affordable housing program. And then I saw that the cap on that was like, I don't know, 80,000 a year or something like that. I was like, oh, well, I'm going to be making more than that, so I won't qualify. But then like, I started looking at like the wait list for that and just saw how many people were on the wait list. And that was one of the things that got me to think about this more critically, because I realized that if there are so many people in the city who are unable to actually afford to live here, then what am I doing? Like, why do I want to move to the city and potentially help drive up housing costs even more? And I think that for me, that was the first time I had to reckon with my potential complicitness in the system. But I didn't know what else to do, because it was one of those things where like no one had told me that, oh, you shouldn't move to a city like this. You shouldn't exacerbate the housing crisis. I had very much bought into this like individualistic notion of success, like kind of what like you were saying. It's just, you know, I had to succeed in my career, and then everything else would just, it doesn't matter. It's all about me. It's all about like, you know, me doing the best I can, climbing up the ladder, making as much money as I can. And like, that is the most useful proxy for like value that I can have as an individual. You know, as long as I'm making a lot of money, then that's fine. I can donate to charity or whatever then.
Yeah.
Right. The system is like, fine, I just have to succeed on its terms.
Exactly. Like kind of like, I heard that a million times, you know, like, oh, I'm actually helping the world more by maximizing my salary, because then I'll have more power to give back. And I that's a whole separate conversation, but I think A, not many people actually do that, and B, I think philanthropy is not an efficient way to distribute resources. I'm sure you would agree. But yeah, when it comes to the housing crisis, and in terms of like complicitness in the system, I do think like, you know, there's the phrase like, there's no ethical consumption under capitalism. I think there's also like, there's no ethical choices under capitalism. There's no ethical like careers under capitalism. There's no ethical like housing under capitalism. I would argue we're all complicit in the system. And obviously like the more resources you have at disposal, the more you're benefiting from the system, and therefore like helping perpetuate the system for sure. But I actually would argue like looking at it as workers exacerbating the housing crisis, well, high income workers like do like the demand from high income workers like does drive up costs. I actually don't think that gets at the root problem of the issue. And so I had an experience like this my senior year in college. I'd always wanted to live in San Francisco. So I'm actually from Marin, which is kind of like an affluent white suburb of San Francisco. And then I went to Stanford and Palo Alto. So I saw that part of the Bay Area's housing crisis in people perpetuating segregation. And I actually had a friend who was not from the Bay Area. My senior year asked me what I wanted to do after college. And I told him I was planning on moving to San Francisco. And he interrupted me and he kind of like admonished me. And he's like, don't you understand you're contributing to gentrification? Like, you should not do that. And while he was good, well-intentioned, I was frustrated with that, because I'm like, well, where do you want me to go? Like, this is my home. Like, am I supposed to leave because I achieved this notion of success that we're like taught to achieve forever? Like, what are my other options? Like, do I move somewhere else because the housing prices have driven up so much in San Francisco? And therefore, like, the more of us who flee to different areas, especially who are high income, like, perpetuate the problem there. Like, if I move to like Reno or something, housing prices are going up in Reno because people from San Francisco are leaving. Same with Sacramento, like all these other areas. So I was frustrated with that. And I'm like, there must be a better way. Like, how can we actually get involved in improving it if we're going to be here? And I think that, like, while things are incredibly dire in San Francisco, and like by a lot of measures, it's like literally the most expensive city in the world, I also think there's this opportunity. So many of us who before, like, more and more high income people are renting. And many of those people are tech workers, like software engineers, the high paid tech workers. And for the first time, like, these are people who in prior generations would have had more access to buying a home. And so there's, I think, this opportunity for building solidarity with people who in cities have always been renters their whole life and will be renters their whole life. Their parents were renters. They grew up in rental housing. There's a big difference between me, whose parents were like very, like, I was very like housing stable as a child. And now I'm dealing with, you know, technically housing insecurity as to someone who's dealt with that their entire life. And I think that I saw this quote recently that was like, radicalization is when we realize that we deserve better. And I think what I would love for the outcome of this scenario to be, which unfortunately I don't think all tech workers are thinking about, would be to say, like, wow, this is really unfair that our landlord treats us in this way. Look at all of the other people who are exploited with the system. How can we look at the people who are impacted the most and help them? And that will help us all. So I really think there's a parallel between tenants and workers, in that workers don't have control over their like economic situation at work, and tenants don't have control over their housing. So
yeah, I love that quote, we deserve better. And I think it does remind me of a quote that, you know, AOC would say at like at rallies, where she talks about how she didn't think she deserved healthcare. And that was like part of what held her back from, you know, supporting radical policies, is just like this idea that no one owes her this and that she isn't entitled to these sorts of things. And I think something that like the left has to, like, you know, activists, anyone who's fighting for radical policies has to figure out how to do is convince people that like they do deserve these things, and that we can create a world where people are able to have the things that they deserve, and that there is a way to distribute this. But something that does worry me is how there's like a counterpart to the idea of that we deserve better, which is I deserve better. And I do worry among tech workers, there's this kind of ideology that's very individualistic, very much like, I'm really good, therefore I deserve a raise. And so, yeah, I mean, you made a point about like luck earlier, how, you know, you felt like you lucked into having like a secure job. And I think hopefully there are more people in the industry who recognize luck as having a role in their success, but I also think it's very easy to get by without considering luck, especially if you're like a white man who grew up in a very, you know, privileged upper middle class environment, and your whole life people have been telling you how amazing you are and how you deserve all the wealth in the world. And then just because of that, it's just so easy for people to like that to think, oh, great, like I got these millions of dollars because I'm just great. And therefore the system works. Therefore the people who aren't doing well, they just aren't that good. And, you know, if they learn to code, if they put time into it, then maybe they could get more. But I think that goes hand in hand with this idea that the system is mostly fair as is. And therefore, you know, if people are not able to succeed under the terms of it, that is their fault.
Yeah, no, I was actually thinking about something similar in our just conversation. And I think this gets at like the idea, I think that's saying that people are deserving, that attitude is people are deserving of things because of something, because they're smarter, because they worked harder, some idea of meritocracy, rather than the concept that people are deserving of things because they're people. Like, and we're all deserving of things like stable housing, a living wage, healthcare, dignity and like the ability to have say over our housing situations and like our workplace. And yeah, kind of what I'm thinking of here, one of the things that really resonated with me while reading your book is this attitude that like, I remember the chapter where y'all moved to New York City to work at this like accelerator. And the starting quote is from Elon Musk. And it's talking about how you just have to work harder. And if you work harder, that's how you're going to succeed. And this like notion that like is really detrimental both to the people working hard and also like that attitude can be really detrimental to society, that both you have to push yourself past this point of health. And if you do, then you're going to be able to achieve these things. And if you don't achieve those things, it's a personal failure. And also this attitude that therefore, when you do that, you can become resentful of other people and say like, well, they don't deserve this because why aren't they doing what I'm doing? And that super resonated with me because it really reminded me of my experience at Stanford, actually. And, you know, Stanford does a great job of getting people excited about their like computer science program. And it's exciting for like 2 classes. And then once you're in it, it's very cutthroat. And so I went all through college having undiagnosed ADHD and bipolar, and I had no experience coding before I got to Stanford. I was good at math. Like I had that background and I'd like coded a little HTML with like Neopets when I was like 12. But like, other than that, like a lot of the kids who start coding at Stanford, like have made startups like in high school or like had taken like AP computer science. Like there's a lot of like the smartest computer science people who are 18 years old go to Stanford. So like there's a big range in like talent. And so in many ways, there were a lot of barriers to like me succeeding in this major. Like I didn't have experience, I had to catch up. I had an undiagnosed learning disability. There wasn't really anyone who looked like me or could relate to me. And that comes with things like, you'd be like partnering, like there's partner project, and like I'd ask guys if they wanted to be my partner and they'd like literally say no because they thought I was dumb. Like stuff like that, you know? And so there's a lot of barriers to succeed. And I think Stanford has this like reputation, the STEM department in particular, for just like not giving a fuck. Can I swear? Is that okay?
We can bleep it out if necessary.
About like people's disability accommodations, like to the point that it is illegal, allegedly.
Wow.
I want to like shout out my friend like Brooke Wittenberger's writing. She's written a lot about this. She actually had cancer and she now has graft versus host disease, and she graduated from Stanford and like was pre-admitted to medical school. She's like one of the smartest people I know, but like so many professors like literally would not even honor her accommodations letters because she had cancer. And like they would blatantly violate the ADA and basically say like, if you can't keep up, you should drop this major. And I think she was a bio or chem major, so like not computer science, but still STEM. And I really internalized that attitude too, because like there were all these barriers to me succeeding in this major. I knew by the end of college that at least I was depressed, even if I didn't have the right diagnosis. And like there's supposedly accommodations accessible to you if you're depressed. But it's like if I emailed the professor for an extension, they wouldn't even email me back because there's so many people in the class. And like if they did, they'd be like, there's already late days granted, like no. And like even if they did offer me an extension, like I'd be behind. Like it was just not an option. And I really like internalized this attitude that it doesn't matter like what the barriers are to you succeeding. If you can't keep up, you're just like not deserving of being here. And you're like less good. Like if you need accommodations, you're like a bad worker, you're a bad student. And I think that people, even the people who can succeed in this environment, since they are pushing themselves so hard, it like creates this vicious cycle where they're like, engineering is so hard, we have so many more credits than the English majors. So therefore, we must be more valuable. And it's really harmful to everyone involved. So yeah, that really reminded me of that. And I think the people who kind of like snap out of that are like the people who face more barriers, because eventually we're like, wait a second, like I'm actually really good at this. Like it isn't unreasonable that like you would give me an extension because I couldn't get out of bed today. Or like, hey, wait a second, like now that Stanford is like offering classes at home because of like coronavirus, I live in a 1-bedroom apartment with like 6 of my siblings. I like, what do you mean? It's like, I'm supposed to do as well as other people. So I think people who already are like marginalized in some way, it comes more naturally for them to recognize, wait a second, this cycle is bad. And people who don't face those challenges, it might not be as intuitive.
Yeah, I totally agreed. I think for me, some of the critiques of the tech industry that resonated the most for me were like women talking about the tech industry from a feminist perspective or from like a analysis of racism in the industry. And it really, yeah, it seems like almost obvious in a sense, but those who are the least favored by the dominant system, they're going to notice the problems with it first. And, you know, maybe some of them they'll like find ways to compensate. Like I definitely found a way to compensate by thinking it's like, oh, I know this industry is sexist, but like not for me. Like I can still figure out how to navigate it. But I think, you know, eventually that kind of cracks because, you know, you can't really maintain that illusion forever. But I mean, what you're saying about this like very, you know, hyper meritocratic, like ruthless system where there's this idea that people have to be good enough to do something, that feels to me just like something that, you know, comes with like late stage capitalism. We're just like the world we live in now where you have this really unequal distribution of income. And then the culture that kind of stems from that is the sense that people just have to work harder. And, you know, it's like, this is, in a way, this is better than another system where people only make money depending on like the family they're born into, because at least there's some room for like social mobility. But at the same time, it comes with this like really stressful, like anxiety inducing sense of constant competition. And like, that is just that, like you're saying, it's bad for everyone involved. It engenders this negative solidarity where, you know, you and your colleague, you might previously find some way to like connect with each other. But then if you're at a company that has a stack ranking, like the way Microsoft used to, where, you know, everyone would be ranked on like a bell curve and the lowest person gets cut or whatever, then you're competing with your colleague. And that just means that deprives you of the ability to like have a human connection with someone that you should be able to have. And sorry, I was going to say something.
No worries.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's really interesting about this idea that there are people who are like good and then there are people who just can't cut it is that what's kind of invisible in this discussion is what is the environment? Because the environment completely determines who's going to succeed. Because you can have an environment where that prefers people who are able to work in a certain way, and therefore maybe like you have the white men who are good at working on their own and who like aren't good at communicating. Maybe that the environment will ensure that these people succeed. But you could also have an environment that's more conducive to different types of collaboration. You have one where you prize communication, you prize empathy, you prize just like thoughtfulness, or you could have one that rewards like taking risks and moving fast and breaking things. And I feel like the contours of the environment are rarely ever discussed when we talk about whether people are good at something or not. And so it's this like binary, oh, this person is good or this person's not. And in an environment like Stanford, I can totally see it being a thing where some of the people who succeed, they're good at succeeding within that kind of environment for whatever reason, because this is what they're used to, because it's just like an environment that favors people with certain personalities or certain ways of relating to the world. But, you know, because that's left invisible, then we kind of assume like, oh, this person's just good, when really we should say this person is good at an environment that prizes competition, or like risk taking, as opposed to, you know, this person's just good in general. And I think when we add that asterisk, then it becomes a little clearer just how like silly this whole distribution of wealth is, because, you know, we're prizing people not for being good in general, but for being good at navigating certain very unfair systems. And yeah, that's like the part that's really frustrating to me, that, you know, people in tech assume that they're just better than other people. It's like, what are you better at? Like, everyone is good at something. We all have bad days, and there are always environments where no matter how good we think we are, we just won't be able to handle it, because like everyone has weaknesses and everyone has strengths.
Yeah, and I think the piece that really goes beyond just like, because I think some people get stuck at like challenging meritocracy, and they're on board with the like, okay, this isn't real meritocracy. And I think like how we expand that to challenging capitalism is also like, okay, we've established like through this conversation all the different ways that different people have different advantages. The environment plays into how good you are at something. Meritocracy isn't this like given that we treat it as. But even if it was, like, even if we were actually able to quantifiably say who is more capable, why do the people who don't meet that cut, why are we okay with them living the way that they do? And I think when you really look at, like, I'm going to use Google as an example because I worked there. Something like 50%, over 50% of Google's employees are contractors. And so many of these people are homeless. You're seeing articles about how they're living in their cars, they're raising children in their cars. Where other people, like the Google executives, took home $90 million when they were dismissed for sexual assault? How is that fair? And like, why are we okay with like the level of, and just to use, like, I think to appeal to like the people in Silicon Valley who like to use the language of like inefficient, like innovation and efficiency, this is not an efficient distribution of our resources. And even if, I don't think we should have to make these arguments in terms of like quantitative stuff or money, but like, we are spending more money in the long run playing catch up by not taking care of people than we would be if we prioritize taking care of people first and foremost. So I think in addition to this idea that like our system is built on a lie, but also even if we were to fix that, the system isn't good, it's not logical, and it's leaving a lot of people behind in ways that are frankly very unethical.
Totally agree with you. I love the framing of the system as inefficient, because I think that's just like, it's almost like a Trojan horse to try to get someone who is, you know, nominally pro-capitalist to consider whether capitalism is maybe not succeeding on the terms that it's supposed to be succeeding on. Like, it's not even efficient. A really efficient system would be one that distributed resources to people according to need. And what do we call that? So yeah.
Not capitalism.
Yeah, definitely. So that actually, I think this is probably like a good place to end. It's like about half an hour or something like that. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I really appreciate everything you said. I feel like we haven't actually talked a lot about these things before. So it was really nice to like hear from you for the first time. So yeah, I really appreciate you sharing your story and like taking the time to do this.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm super honored and humbled to be able to have this discussion with you. And I hope people who are listening to this, the takeaway will be, you should read Abolish Silicon Valley. It's fantastic. And I think one note I want to end on is kind of what we were just talking about. I think even if you don't consider yourself an anti-capitalist, I think one of the things that I like best about this book is, I think some people read the sensational title and they're like, oh, like, she must hate innovation, she must hate technology. I think both Wendy and I really love technology, and we want it to be able to, we want to build technology for the sake of technology, for helping people. And so I would challenge you to pick it up and like see if it like opens your mind to some of those different structures. So couldn't recommend the book more highly.
Thank you. And I would also recommend listeners to check out Sasha's work on housing.